listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. What's in an election slogan? If recent campaigns overseas are anything to go by, possibly a lot. The Prime Minister and opposition leader have fired the starting guns on their pitches to us with the hopes a repeated phrase could win us over.
Albanese is trying to look to the future. It's I suppose, a more optimistic slogan. And Dutton is basically saying to people, well, you know, you've been worse off as a result of these 3 years of Labor government. So, you know, get back to the great government the Coalition provided.
In the second half of this episode, former PM Malcolm Turnbull gives his verdict on the slogans and takes us behind the scenes of a campaign. First, though, time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Wednesday, January 15.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. The Australian government is making urgent inquiries amid reports a Melbourne man fighting for Ukraine has been killed by Russian forces. Concerns for Oscar Jenkins' safety first arose late last year after a video emerged in December showing Russian soldiers interrogating him and parading his capture.
Oscar Jenkins, 32 years old.
It is unclear how long the schoolteacher has been fighting alongside Ukrainian forces. Jenkins, who has no military background, is believed to have joined the war out of a strong sense of duty and solidarity with Ukraine following Russia's invasion in 2022, Sash.
A Department of Foreign Affairs spokesperson says they are yet to verify reports of his death, but they hold grave concerns. DFAT also confirming they're providing consular assistance to his family. Meantime, the Russian ambassador to Australia has been summoned by the Foreign Minister Penny Wong to provide further information. And the opposition Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Simon Birmingham, has called on the federal government to expel Russia's ambassador to Australia if Russian forces have indeed killed Jenkins. Now, it is believed that if he is dead, it would have occurred while he was in Russian custody, Chris. And Russia is a party to the 1949 Geneva Convention, which requires prisoners of war to be protected from violence and inhumane treatment. Jenkins is the first Australian known to have been captured by Russia.
A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is imminent, according to multiple reports today. Talks between the two sides are in their final stages, according to the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who says they're awaiting a final word from the Palestinian group about whether they agree to the terms. This deal would be implemented in 3 phases, the first of which would see at least 33 Israeli hostages freed and Palestinian prisoners released from detention in Israel. The Israeli military would begin withdrawing from population centres during the first phase, but would remain along the Gaza-Egypt border.
Yeah, and the second phase is intended to end the war, but Israel has not committed to a full withdrawal of troops at this stage. And we know that's something that Hamas has been really not willing to budge on, that they want a full withdrawal from Gaza. Negotiations to finalise this second phase would start on the 16th day of the first phase and would also include talks about the third and final stage of the ceasefire deal. So from what we can tell, Chris, there's only one phase of this deal that has really been locked in, and even the details of that are still being finalised. And it's not since November of 2023 that there have been any significant pauses in the fighting or formal release of hostages. Some have been freed by the IDF or managed to escape. More than 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7, while the death toll in Gaza since Israel launched its attack is at over 46,000 people now. Most of them civilians, women, children, the elderly. Joe Biden, of course, is pretty keen to get this locked in before he leaves office. But interestingly, both sides, when I say both sides, I mean Biden and Donald Trump's office, have taken credit for the progress of these talks. Now, Donald Trump would be thinking that his rhetoric since winning in November of last year is what might have swayed Hamas to come to the table again, because he has said if Israel's hostages aren't freed before he takes the White House, that, quote, all hell will break out in the Middle East. He's also used the rhetoric of letting Israel, quote, finish the job in Gaza. So he's taken this strong man, strong arm approach and thinks that it's working.
In more Trump news, a report released overnight in the US has revealed there was enough evidence to convict him of trying to overturn the 2020 election result, but he can't face trial because he won in November. Special counsel Jack Smith, who indicted the president-elect on the charges, has released his final report into the matter. It details his decision to bring a 4-count indictment against Trump, accusing him of plotting to obstruct the collection and certification of votes following his 2020 defeat.
Yes, but after Trump won the 2024 election, as you said, Chris, Smith dropped the cases because of a Justice Department policy that prohibits prosecuting sitting presidents. Now, in response, the incoming president has labelled Smith deranged, claiming the release of this report was part of a political hit job to disrupt his transition to power. Pretty rich, Chris, coming from the man who incited January 6 rioters in 2021 to try and stop the certification of Joe Biden's win in that 2020 election. It's pretty rich, but I mean, we expect that of Trump, unfortunately.
Expect nothing less.
Look, turning now to his inauguration, it's less than a week away, and we now know who's going to be among those people to perform. And you and I have been speculating about who might take to the stage. I'd just want Hulk Hogan to get up and do the oath of office.
Well, it's the only time that we really hear from Kid Rock. The only time we hear from him is at a Trump event, so we're waiting to see if he's on the list. But
we haven't got confirmation of either of those, but the Village People are going to be among them. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. They're going to be performing at a couple of events across the inauguration calendar, I suppose, which goes for a couple of days. Interestingly, they put out a statement saying that we know this won't make some of you happy to hear, but we believe music is to be performed without regard to politics. Now, they went on to say that they want to bring the country together after a tumultuous and divided campaign. They say where our preferred candidate lost, claiming that it's time to bring people together with music, and that's why the Village People will be performing at a bunch of Trump's inauguration events, which is interesting. Most artists who don't like Trump using their music have come out and said, we don't want you to use our music. Please stop. Sounds like they're not fans of Trump, but they think that music shouldn't cross the political sphere. I don't know.
Yeah, I also mean the way that Trump dances to this song specifically has gone viral so many times. So I reckon the Village People are lapping this up. It's a whole new generation of people listening to their songs, which, according to them, especially YMCA, is not a gay anthem. Don't call it a gay anthem. They don't like hearing that, even though,
Sure, Jan.
It definitely is.
Also, Carrie Underwood, who's a former American Idol winner, is expected to perform before he takes the oath of office. And we also know now Michelle Obama won't be attending, her office giving no reason.
Matilda star Sam Kerr has had a date set for her trial of racially aggravated assault of a police officer in the UK. She's faced court overnight, with February 3 locked in as the first day of hearings. A reminder, this is over an alleged incident in which Kerr made comments towards a police officer while on a night out in London in January of 2023.
Meantime, staying briefly in the UK, Princess Catherine has confirmed she's in remission from cancer. In an Instagram post, she's thanked the London hospital which looked after her, saying, quote, "It is a relief to now be in remission and I remain focused on recovery."
Oh, such great news. And turning briefly now to the Australian Open before we wrap up today, Alex de Minaur was the only Aussie to book a spot in the second round after a straight sets win over his Dutch opponent.
2 match points for the Demon.
Game, second match, de Minaur. By 3-set Finland, 6-1, 7-5.
De Minaur safely through to the second round.
Alexei Popyrin and Rinky Hijikata were among those who unfortunately crashed out.
Yeah, but there are still plenty left to play in today's action. We've got Ayla Tomljanovic again. She's into the second round there. Talia Gibson representing our women's hopes, while Jordan Thompson, Alexander Vukic, James Duckworth and Thanasi Kokkinakis are in the men's. We'll also see Novak Djokovic, Carlos Alcaraz, Naomi Osaka and defending champ Aryna Sabalenka take to the court. Thank you, Chris. Next up, we're getting into our deep dive looking at the political slogans of the 2025 election campaign. Will they work? Former PM Malcolm Turnbull tells us.
Hey, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Bension Siebert. When you hear politicians talking like this,
it's an important part of building Australia's future.
And this,
to get our country back on track,
you know that an election is coming. We don't know the exact date, but we do know you will be hearing these lines, building Australia's future and let's get Australia back on track, over and over and over again until we go to the polls, probably in April or May. But which one is a genuine reflection of how people are feeling right now? Which one tells you that Albanese or Dutton, both wealthy career politicians, really understand the struggles of the average punter? And what goes on behind closed doors to decide on these high-stakes lines? To give us a peek behind the curtain and for his verdict on who has the winning message, someone who's done it many times before, former PM Malcolm Turnbull joins us. Malcolm Turnbull, welcome back to the briefing.
Yeah, great to be with you.
Anthony Albanese says he's building Australia's future. Peter Dutton says, let's get Australia back on track. Who's got the winning slogan?
Oh, I don't think either of them are particularly inspiring, but not many political slogans are, you know. I mean, Albanese's trying to look to the future. It's I suppose, a more optimistic slogan. And Dutton is basically saying to people, well, you know, you've been worse off as a result of these 3 years of Labor government. So, you know, get back to the great government the Coalition provided. Look, slogans are not really what it's all about. I mean, it's about whether people actually can switch on to the message. And, you know, that requires really compelling advocacy if you're going to do it properly.
Sure, but there have been slogans in Australia's history that have made an impact. Axe the carbon tax, for example, Kevin 07, It's Time. They're not nothing. And with Peter Dutton's slogan, for example, let's get Australia back on track, you could probably hear someone saying that in a conversation. Do you think that you could hear someone saying, let's build Australia's future? Just in general conversation?
I agree with you. I think that the Dutton slogan is probably likely to resonate more with people who feel things are not going as well as they were. And this is, you know, really all about cost of living above all. But Albanese is, again, he's trying to throw forward. But nostalgia and looking back to the past is working. I mean, Trump was, you know, make America great again is a backward-looking slogan. It's saying we were great once, now we're going to be great again. And Dutton's message is very similar to that. So he's, you know, it's in line with a lot of successful populist messages. But again, you know, obviously I've had plenty of slogans in my political career. You know, most of them I don't think are very terribly inspiring. It's really a question of the vibe. When you mentioned Kevin 07, when Rudd was running in 2007, I mean, there was a real time for a change mood going on. There really was. You know, Howard, you know, I think had overall run a very good government over 11 years or so, but he'd been there too long for most people. They were looking for a change. So, you know, Kevin, you know, represented that, you know, sort of fresh-faced, younger candidate. I mean, I think, you know, part of Albanese's problem is that he is not a particularly inspiring speaker. He's a, you know, good person, well-motivated, got all the right instincts in terms of wanting to do the right thing. I'm not saying he's always got the right policies, far from it, but he's not a compelling communicator. And neither is Dutton, really, but he's a punchier communicator than Albanese. So.
Can you give us a bit of a look behind the curtain? You mentioned that you've had plenty of slogans in your political career. What does it look like? Are you having like multiple meetings about whether you say building Australia's future or building our future or building my future? Or...
Well, the way it would work is that the parties will have done a lot of research and, you know, there are a lot of focus groups in particular. And so they're trying to capture what people are looking for. So they'll be trying to tap into something that resonates. And so Dutton would be saying, well, you know, a lot of Australians feel things are not on track. You know, prices are too high, inflation's too high, housing is too unaffordable, you know, the whole bunch of things that people are unhappy with. So his message is to say, I'm not going to promise some, you know, great vision of the future. I'm going to get things back on track. And that would be something that would be coming out of focus groups. And you've got to remember too, I mean, a lot of people think politicians just rely on research. I mean, politicians are going around the country talking to people all the time. I mean, some of them are lazy and don't do this, but the bulk of them, the leaders certainly, are constantly talking to people and listening to people and getting feedback. And, they're out there in the community. They can, even if people are being very courteous, they can read their body language. And so your attitude to the campaign will be informed both by your own experience and that of your colleagues, and also the information that comes out of research.
Do you think that either of these men, or maybe both of these men, understand what it's like to be an average Australian, let's say, at the moment? They are very wealthy men. They've both been in Parliament for decades, and this is an election potentially all about the cost of living.
Well, the answer is neither of them are in financially difficult circumstances. But, no one in Parliament really is in that situation. Parliamentarians obviously probably feel they're not paid well enough, but they are all well paid. And both Dutton and Albanese have got substantial assets of their own. Dutton, more so than Albanese, to be honest. But I think, people have got emotional intelligence. They've got empathy. You don't have to be actually experiencing economic privation to be able to understand what it means and what it involves. I mean, obviously it helps if you have experienced that, but I'm just saying, we're all empathy and, EQ is a very important part of politics.
Do you think people are listening yet? There's been sort of an unofficial election campaign that's been going on for some time now. When do you think people start to tune in?
Well, some people are tuned in all the time. Probably your listeners, for example, are very tuned in all the time. Some people only get tuned in, if they do at all, as they're wandering into the ballot box. Generally, this period between, Christmas and Australia Day is generally a pretty quiet period politically. So it's interesting that Albanese has got started with a mini campaign already, which does, a lot of people will say that suggests he's going to go for an early election. But as January rolls out and people come back to work and go back to school and get back into their normal routine, they'll be switching back into political considerations.
Do you think that this, at this late stage, arguably, could still be a soft launch of these slogans? Is there any chance that we'll be hearing anything different, or is it locked in now that we're going to be hearing these two slogans for the next few months?
I don't know. I mean, I imagine they'll stick with them. They're pretty basic messages. If you said to Peter Dutton, "Are you building Australia's future?" he would say, "Yes, of course I am," right? So that's not his slogan, but he would say, "I want to get Australia back on track and build Australia's future." Albanese, who is obviously the incumbent, has got to say, well, Australia is on track, but we're going to do even better. So the incumbent is always a bit on the defensive, because they get blamed, for whatever people are unhappy with, even if it's not really their responsibility.
2024 has been a bloodbath for incumbent governments all over the world. Lots of governments have gone out of power. That said, though, you have to go back to 1929 to find an Australian federal government that hasn't at least got a second term. Who's your money on?
Well, I'm not betting. I'm not a gambler anyway, but I wouldn't bet on this election. Look, I think it's going to be very close. I would be very surprised if either the Liberal National Coalition or the Labor Party got a majority in the House of Representatives, right? So I think it is likely to be a minority government that will depend on support from the crossbench.
Given what's happened with the Teal independence, the analysis has been that it's really going to be hard for anyone to get majority government sort of going into the future. Is minority government good, bad or indifferent, do you think, for Australia?
Well, look, I used to lead the Liberal Party, right? And so I would always say...
Did you?
Yes, don't vote for independence. You need stable majority government.
Yeah.
And look, that's a reasonable argument, but a Labor leader, a Liberal leader is always going to say that. I think you have to look back at experience. There have been plenty of minority governments in Australia, particularly at the state level. And by and large, they've been very effective, or, as effective as a majority government. If you look at the Gillard government, the 43rd Parliament, which was a wild time, people look at that, say that was unstable because of the minority government. The thing that made the 43rd Parliament unstable was the internal ructions within the Labor Party. The arrangement with the crossbenchers, with Tony Windsor and so forth, were very stable. And look, again, if you look at other parliaments around the world, there are coalition governments where the party, say that from where the Prime Minister comes from, does not have a majority in its own right and it has to work with other parties. That's more common than not in most parliamentary systems. So I don't think it's the end of the world or the recipe for disaster. And I mean, if you look, you mentioned the Teals. I mean, the Teals, so-called, are all women, as it happens, but they are highly intelligent, capable women. There's any one of them would have been a fantastic member of any cabinet I was involved in. You can't say the Teals are sort of quirky, zany, sort of nutty independents. I mean, they're not like Bob Catter, right? I mean, Bob Catter is clearly a zany, eccentric character, right? And that's his brand.
How? Name one time.
Well, he just is. He just is. I mean, you've only got to watch Bob, and I've got nothing against him at all. But the Teals are a collection of very capable, experienced professional women.
Obviously, you're a long-time Liberal Party man, but you've also described Peter Dutton as a thug. Obviously, you're someone who's concerned very much about climate change, but you're no Labor Party man either. Who do you think should win the election?
Well, look, I'm not involved in party politics anymore, and I was perhaps, too harsh in what I said about Dutton. I mean, I've got a long history with Peter Dutton. And, obviously he was the person who, attempted a sort of coup against my government in 2018 and, basically blew up my government. And as a result, he didn't get the top job, but Scott Morrison did, which of course was the last thing he wanted because he didn't like Scott or vice versa. But I think Dutton, let's be honest, I mean, Dutton's been in politics a long time. He's operated in that right-wing media ecosystem, the shock jocks, 2GB, Sky After Dark, Murdoch tabloids. That's kind of his comfort space. And he has, preferred to focus on issues that I would regard as being divisive. While, Morrison turned out to do some strange things that no one expected, I guess, when he was Prime Minister. But my concern about Dutton always was that his divisive approach to politics, and that is a model which a lot of populists seek to use nowadays, was not consistent with a harmonious multicultural society. But look, he's a very experienced guy. He's been in politics for a long time. If he's ever Prime Minister, he may grow into the office. Some people grow into the office and realise a better side to themselves. Other people do pretty weird things. I mean, look at Morrison's secret ministries. I mean, that's about as weird as you can get. Well, no one would have expected that. Albanese, on the other hand, is, again, a very well-known quantity. I mean, I think his fundamental problem is that he is not a great communicator. Now, this is like saying I'm not a great 100-metre sprinter, right? I'm just not. I never was, even in my youth. And he is not an inspiring advocate. And that's okay. There have been plenty of successful political leaders who aren't.
Well, we'll be watching all of this very closely. Malcolm Turnbull, thanks so much again for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you.
former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. It's a really easy way you can support us and all we do here at The Briefing. So is sharing our social posts. Check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Bension Siebert. See you next time.